My name is Michael Bendis. I grew up here in Cleveland, Ohio, 33 years, man and boy. And yeah, Phil the cat. And I lived on the east side. I grew up on the east side, moved to the west side, traveled all over the city, lived and breathed it. I'm here. I went to the Cleveland Institute of Art and actually went to art camp right here in the Cleveland Museum of Art. In fact, in that seat right there, I made out with my junior high school girlfriend for the very first time. I'm sure they've reupholstered since. It's a long time ago. But anyway, I'm here because I am a sequential artist, which is the sanitation engineer label for someone who makes comic books for a living. I make comics that I own, but I also am probably better known for the books that I do for Marvel Comics. For the last 15 years, I've been honored to be in charge of some of the big franchises like the Avengers and the X-Men, and I've written every single issue of Ultimate Spider-Man since its inception. I'm part of the team, or sometimes the sole author, of the big Marvel summer events where we really blow stuff up and really annoy people and change the face of Marvel Comics forever. These stories are so much fun to tell. It's such an honor to do them. And you think just writing them would be it, but you don't realize when you start that your work is going to be published in languages all over the world, which is such an honor. You get mail from all over the place in languages I don't speak. I get yelled at by people in languages I don't understand, and the only thing I've learned from that is that uncontrollable nerd rage is a unifying language that brings us all together. It's also been my honor to work in some of the writers' rooms for the animated shows for the younger audience. I worked on the video games and the bigger Marvel video games. And the thing that most impresses my mother, or the one she can wrap her head around, is that I am part of the Marvel Creative Committee, which means that I consult on all of the Marvel movies going all the way back from Iron Man 1, which is really an amazing experience. I get to meet with and watch some of the greatest storytellers, film storytellers working in film today. And because of that, I have a treat. I get to show you some footage from the still in production Avengers #2. Actually, no, I don't. I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. Seriously, even if I had that footage, which it would never happen, a sniper dressed like Mickey Mouse would have took me out before I hit this button. It would never happen. Before all that, though, I worked here in Cleveland, and I wrote and drew graphic novels exclusively about Cleveland, dealing with our seedy true crime past or the seedy true crime present that I wish was happening around me. Being an independent comic book creator is a lot like being an independent film, which basically means that you have to hustle to get the money together to make your own project, and you do the project all by yourself, and you really have no idea when you're done if anyone's going to see it, or if anyone's going to care, or if anyone's going to like it. But you just do it to do it, and hold your breath, and wish for the best. To make my money, to make these comics, I worked all over the city. I worked for the Cleveland Plain Dealer for a couple years as the Sunday Magazine cartoonist, really annoying old people every single week, really, really strengthening my resolve for when I angered people all over the world in comics. I worked at Scene Magazine and Cleveland Magazine. Before Marx was Marx, it was called Bernie Schulman's, and they used to hire artists to draw the signs over the aisles. That was me. Good night. There you go. And also, I was a caricature artist, and I worked hundreds of weddings and bar mitzvahs all over this city. And I'm here to tell you, it is the worst thing on the planet to draw caricatures at weddings and bar mitzvahs all over the city. I have worked at McDonald's. I have cleaned the refrigerators of bakeries. Drawing caricatures in public social settings with drunk people is the worst thing in the world. I would love to now spend the rest of my TED Talk talking to you about how awful it is to draw characters, but we'll move on to what I do now. It started when I was a little kid. I was sitting in my bedroom in University Heights, Ohio, and comics were a part of my life from my earliest memory. And I walked into my family dinner at a Passover, and I announced to my family that I was going to be the writer and artist of Spider-Man. I was 6 years old. I had no idea why I was saying this or what it meant, but I announced it, and really my family, my mother and my brother, are truly the only people that really can appreciate, wow, he got really close. I mean, you know. So, but what it was I was young, and I would read these books, and I became obsessed with the little boxes in the front of the book. The little boxes with the names of the people who were responsible for these experiences that I was having. At first, I thought, I just want to see my name in those boxes because I thought it was the coolest place on earth to see your name. I was a little kid. It seemed really cool to me. But really what was happening was I was experiencing, we've all experienced it in some medium, I was experiencing true storytelling for the first time. I was being transported, I was being educated, my mind was being blown, doors were opening, and I kept flipping to the back of the book, the front of the book, to see who was responsible for this moment that I just had. I just had this moment, who did it, and I would memorize their names. And these became my rock stars. And I said, I would like to do this. Whatever this is, whatever this feeling that I have, I would like to give this feeling to other people. How do you do this? Can you do this? Is there somewhere I can take a class to teach me how to do this? And it didn't seem that you could. But ever since allowance became part of my life, I dedicated all of it to trying to find out how do you make comics and how do you make them awesome. And it wasn't easy back then, as I'm about to date myself in many, many statements that I make in the next few minutes. There was no internet, so I couldn't Google how do you make comics and how do you make it awesome. I literally had to be like an archaeologist and sift through things to try to figure out how do you do this. So yes, that included collecting comics, but it also included digging through every little thing I could find to find a little bit of information someone would share about how to do this. But still, I was racked with doubt. I would like, how can a little Jewish boy from Cleveland make it in the fast-paced, jet-set world of comic book making? I didn't know. In my head, and also Stan Lee was in the books he would sell in the bullpen bulletins. There was a rockin' good time they were having, and I was like, can I get there? How do you get there? Where's New York? I don't even know. It was my mother who said, hey, Superman was created here in Cleveland, and I think I spent about a year going, what? But she was right. And then as I got a little older, and I would sneak down at 12:30 at night to watch Letterman, and I did it every night. I would go to sleep at 9, wake up at 12:30, watch Letterman, go back to sleep, go to school. That's where I discovered Harvey Pekar. He's from Cleveland. And then soon I discovered the Robert Crumb and Ziggy. Probably not in the same day, in the same environment that I find they were from Cleveland, but I discovered, okay, you can make it from Cleveland. But how? How do you do it? Well, all I had at the time was this book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way by Stan Lee and John Buscema. This was my Torah. I walked around with it like a Bible. I just hugged it and I walked around with it. I scooped through it, looking for hidden meanings, looking for the secret, trying to figure out how to do it. I still have this book. I still have this copy of this book. It looks like it's been through wars. Soon after, I discovered the real experiences that I'm going to have that let me know what kind of storyteller I'm going to be and why I'm going to do it, came in Cleveland, and it came at comic book conventions. Now, we think about comic book conventions, we think of this, the now billion-dollar industry of San Diego, this crazy circus. But most comic book conventions, particularly in the 80s, are more like this. And it's cool, though, because we are like-minded people, and we were there for a reason. We really love something, and there's someone who does it, and I want to know how to do it. I'm going to find out how to do it. There was a convention downtown Cleveland that now is a casino, and at that convention, they were selling How to Draw a Comics seminar. My dad signed me up for it, and I didn't know at the time when I took the class that it was being taught by Gil Kane. Now, Gil Kane, I heard a gasp, so that's good. I didn't know this at the time. I'm like 12 years old. My dad didn't know. I didn't know. Gil Kane is a true comic book legend. The real deal. He created the modern Green Lantern, a seminal run on Spider-Man, considered by all people who make comics a true artist, a master of anatomy, a master of storytelling, and he is the person who taught me gesture drawing, who taught me anatomy, and I sat in this class and he blew my mind. He got me on the right road. Finding out later that Gil Kane did this for me is like finding out, if you're a filmmaker, that old man who taught you how to work a camera, that was Sidney Lumet. A friend said that to me. That's what it's like. It was an amazing experience. It happened right here. And at the time, this book was out. This is Frank Miller, and this is his first creator-owned book called Ronin. Frank Miller would go on to create things you know, like Sin City and 300. This came out, and it was like a revolution. It was the biggest thing in the world. He was the big rock star, and for guys my age, he was a god. And that's all people were talking about at this convention, and everything he did was golden to me. I saw nothing but gloriousness. Someone in this class asked Gil Kane, they said, hey, what do you think of Frank Miller? And steam started coming out of this man's ears. And he walked up to his drawing board and started to draw a horse. And angrily started yelling, this is what a horse looks like. Someone tell Frank Miller, that's how you draw a horse. And I was like, they look both good to me. But I was a young man, and I'd never seen another man pathologically jealous of another man's success. And I thought to myself, I can do that. I can be pathologically jealous of another man's success. And I was like Ray Liotta in Goodfellas, like, I can't wait to be a gangster. Anyway, but it was a truly magnificent experience, and it propelled me for a whole year. And the next year, at another convention in this city, a young man named John Totleben was there. Now, John Totleben is not a name that a lot of you know, but John Totleben had just, when he was at this convention, started working on a book called Swamp Thing that would become a legendary run with the soon-to-be legendary Alan Moore, who was also just about to start Watchmen. At the time, this artwork freaked me out. And I was at this convention looking at his art, and it was scaring the shit out of me. I was so rattled by it because even though it's beautiful, I never seen anything like it. I had grown up on Walt Simonson, George Perez, Frank Miller, Art Adams. So this, to my young eyes, was startling. It would soon become one of my favorite comics of all time. And I was sitting there holding the artwork in my hands, and I never held original artwork before. And I think you can see just from the detail that this artwork is collage work. It's the ink and the pointillism is creating almost a painterly-like texture. And touching it was like touching a painting more than it was touching a drawing. And it was really opening my eyes to things. And I could see style. I could see the work that went into it. And it was opening my eyes in a big, big way. And also sitting next to him was the printed version. And the printed version was all muddied out because it was being printed on newsprint, which was the standard of comic books at the time. And I was baffled by the amount of work that he was doing that wasn't being seen by anybody. And I asked him, I said, why are you putting so much texture and layers into this if it all gets muddied out? And here came life lesson number one. He just looked at me like he never even thought of it before, and he just looked at me and said, because I like it. And I know we all kind of know that now. I didn't know that at the time. You should do it because you like it. I was kind of startled. While I was sitting there having my moment and trying to figure out what that meant to me, my dad looked around the convention. He goes, I don't mean to be rude. He said this to John. He goes, this place is kind of dead. There's no one really here. And John goes, this isn't the real convention. The real convention is actually across the street, and there's a lot of big guests like Walt Simonson. And I snapped out of it, and I went, Walt Simonson? Walt Simonson is here in Cleveland? And before anything else, I grabbed all my artwork, and I ran out of the room and said, let's get the hell out of here. And I ran away. I didn't say thank you to John. I didn't say goodbye to John, who spent all this time just graciously humoring me. I just ran out of the room because Walt Simonson was here. Now, the good news is that years later, as an adult, I got to meet John again. And I got to apologize to John, and I got to work with John. I said to John, I have done this and I'm sorry. He didn't remember it. It haunts me still, even though I apologize, but he didn't remember it. You know those things you do when you're a kid and they just haunt you and that you never let them go? That's mine. But back to Walt Simonson. I ran across the street. Now, Walt Simonson was my Bruce Springsteen. You had Bruce Springsteen, I had Walt Simonson. This is my rock star, and he was right there. And I have questions that need answers, and he knows the answers. Walt Simonson is best known for his run on Thor, that only, except for Jack Kirby, did anyone do more for this character. The Thor you see in the movies is widely regarded to be Walt Simonson's Thor. It's not just my opinion, he's in the movie. That the filmmakers think so as well. He is a graphic designer, he's a powerful artist and a writer with a massive imagination, and everything he did blew my mind. I ran across the street, I ran into the convention, I pushed my way past whoever was waiting in line for him and was hanging around his table, and I dumped my art on his table, out of breath, and I said, please, and I asked him all the questions that a dumb person asks a smart person. And instead of calling security, which he was well within his rights to do, he did something amazing. He pushed the table aside and let me back behind the table where the creative people go. And he sat me down, he laid out all my art, and he talked about it like it was real art for a while. And whatever he said to me that day, I left there feeling like $1 million. I left there feeling like I had an obligation to learn, an obligation to continue, an obligation to create. And I was floating. It was an amazing experience. So I went on my way, and I thought about, and every time I thought I created something worth a damn, I would mail it to Walt. I would mail it to a lot of people, but Walt would sometimes respond, always with words of encouragement, always with something nice and positive to say. Good criticism. And I know you're thinking, wow, you must have been like a 12-year-old savant. You must have been some amazing artist that he thought it was worth taking this time. This is the artwork. This is not amazing artwork. This is 12-year-old, 15-year-old nonsense. Among these projects that I now pursued were my adaptation of Raiders of the Lost Ark that would stop Marvel from making their, what I consider to be their terrible comic book adaptation of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and that they would see my version of Raiders of the Lost Ark, stop publishing theirs, and put mine instead. This is the thoughts that are rolling around my head. This Captain America versus Punisher graphic novel I wrote and drew a total of 6 times that year. This Avengers graphic novel, which I so thought was the best Avengers graphic novel that ever existed. I would send these out, and he would respond. I did start my first creator-owned comic book with my brother, Jared. It was called The Powerful Pachyderm. That is the original cover. We did it at school, and we convinced our art teacher at the time to let us run it off on the mimeograph roller. I'm dating myself with the mimeograph. Before fax, the mimeograph roller, we made copies of it, and we got shut down when the principal found out we were selling them for profit and keeping the money. I show this to you because my brother's in the audience, and I think there's nothing funnier than the fact that I am broadcasting this, I am projecting this image on a wall in the Cleveland Museum of Art. Thank you. But I continued on. It would be years before Scott McCloud would produce Understanding Comics, and Will Eisner's Comics and Sequential Art was only being published locally on the East Coast. It was very hard to find. I would find like parts of it in magazines. But miraculously, and I'll spare you all this torture, I ended up at the Cleveland Institute of Art, which is a lovely fine arts school. How? I have no idea, but I got in. I got in, but I was frustrated because I wanted to be a comic book artist now, and I wanted to learn how to make comics now. I would whine about it to anyone who would listen, and one day I was so excited because the print magazine, the magazine for graphic designers and illustrators, that quarter had dedicated their magazine to comics because, as we were trying to convince anyone who would listen, the best things happening in graphic design and illustration in America right then was in comics, and this was proof that we were right. So I ran in to show them. And they were kind enough to put me in independent study, which means to let me sit in the corner and make my comics, which was exactly what I needed to do, all right? Because while I was still in college, I started working in a comic store, and I started selling the comics I was making in class at the store, and I would get feedback from people who weren't my mother or my teacher. And the feedback was, you should try this publisher or that publisher. And while I was still in college, I was able to get a publishing contract to publish my independent comics. And this was it. I was making comics. And there I was on the independent comic scene in the 90s, meeting who would be my best friends in the world, working with people who I would work with for the rest of my life, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, trying not to make them again, watching other people make creative mistakes, and realizing every time you see someone do it, what a fragile thing it is to make a living in a creative field, no matter what you do. But still, it always feels like you're learning something new every time. It never feels like you've figured it out. But I was home with my brand new wife, and I got the call from Marvel Comics. And they said, hey, we read some of your stuff. We're thinking of starting Spider-Man over from scratch. Is that something you might be interested in? Now, what's amazing is that I got the job around the same time that the internet did something amazing for comics. And that is that something about comics made us hug them and be insular. We weren't sharing our experience. Sometimes with your close friends you were, but sometimes you would be the only person who read comics in your peer group, or it would be you and your friend, or you would just read them and keep them to yourself. There wasn't a lot of people sharing. And the internet opened that up. Whatever nerdy thought you have, now you could share it with people all over the world, any time of the day or night. And with that came the experience of us showing our work and getting instant feedback every Wednesday. You like that movie Every Given Sunday? It's the same thing for comic people. Every given Wednesday, we're a hero or the worst thing that ever happened. But what's great is that there's open lines of communication with me and my peers and everyone who reads our work. And what happens is that I personally end up getting a ton of mail asking for advice, asking for that question that I was haunted by. And I literally get one of these about every hour. Hi, I live in Malaysia. Hi, I live in Arkansas. Hi, I live in the Adirondacks. I love comic books so much. I work on my books so much. Can I make it in comics? Is there a place for me in comics? I don't speak English. Can I make comics? And I try almost every day to stop what I'm doing and answer a version of that question as often as I can. And I tell them, here's what I learned. It took all these years, but I learned it. If you want to be in comics, all you have to do is make a comic. Poof, you're in comics. You don't have to wait for Marvel and DC. You don't have to wait for whatever you think someone's going to come tap you on the head. If you make it and you release it, you are that thing. Same thing with filmmakers. You want to be a filmmaker? Make a film, put on YouTube. Poof, you're a filmmaker. Can't take it away from you. That's it. Want to be a musician? Sing a song. You're a musician. The walls have come down like never before. And I stopped to do this, and I tell them this, and I say, but make sure you do it for the right reason. Do it because it makes you happy. And the reason that I do this, the reason I stop, is because after all these years, I think back and I go, be Walt Simonson. Be Walt Simonson. Just like the name in the little boxes in my comics. Thank you.